The war had ended. Silence hung over the barracks, a silence that no command, no marching order could break. The air smelled of soap. Steam drifted from rows of metal pipes that hissed softly, releasing a warmth many of the men had forgotten existed. A guard, young and expressionless, gestured toward the tiled room ahead. "Shower," he said simply. The captured soldiers hesitated. Some stepped forward slowly, uncertain. Others stared, as though facing something sacred or forbidden. For years they had bathed in icy rivers, under rationed buckets, in conditions where water itself was a privilege of survival. Now, before them, stood polished faucets and clean towels, symbols of a world that seemed impossibly gentle. They removed their worn uniforms in silence. Some flinched as the first drops of hot water touched their skin. Too soft, too pure. The sensation was alien. The smell of soap filled the air, and soon the sound of running water blended with a quiet rhythm of disbelief. In this simple act, the shower, two worlds collided. The defeated, stripped of power and empire, stood naked before the modern world's civility. And the victors, armed not with rifles now, but with hygiene and order, revealed another kind of strength, the power to cleanse, not to destroy. To the Western guards, it was routine. To the prisoners, it was revelation. A civilization that had taught its soldiers to embrace suffering now stood face to face with one that fought filth, disease, and indignity with the same discipline it brought to war. The question lingered in that quiet, steaming room. Pair. When war ends, what truly separates the civilized from the conquered? The sword or the soap? Before that moment in the camp, the men of the Imperial Japanese Army had lived by a code older than the empire itself. Bushido, the way of the warrior, taught them endurance, obedience, and austerity. Cleanliness was not neglected, but it was practical, stripped of comfort. To bathe was to purify before duty, not to indulge in warmth. Water was scarce on the front. Soap was rarer still. In the jungles of the Pacific, men bathed in muddy streams or wiped sweat with rags hardened by salt. Illness was common, but complaint was forbidden. The body was an instrument of the emperor, to be used until it broke. Survival itself was a form of worship. Across the ocean, their American, Australian, and British counterparts lived differently. In the industrialized West, cleanliness had become a public ideal, a measure of progress, discipline, and humanity. Soap was not luxury, but necessity. Sanitation, not ritual, but science. Soldiers were trained to wash not as a ceremony, but as prevention, a defense against invisible enemies of disease. When the war ended, and the captured soldiers were brought into Allied camps, they entered a new world. Here, the air was free of rot. The floors were clean. Food came in measured portions, and water, endless, hot, pure, flowed from silver pipes. To the guards, it was nothing unusual. To the prisoners, it was a quiet humiliation and a quiet wonder. Defeat had stripped them of uniform and empire, yet it offered a glimpse into another kind of strength, a civilization that had mastered its own filth, not merely its enemies. The contrast was not only material, it was philosophical, a collision between two visions of discipline. To understand the moment when a Japanese prisoner stepped beneath a modern shower, one must look beyond metal and water. It was not the device itself that astonished, but the meaning it carried. In Japanese military life, Cleanliness was measured by ritual precision. A soldier could polish his rifle, scrub his uniform, or wash his body in cold water from a tin basin. Yet all of it was bound to duty. The act served the emperor, not the self. Cleanliness was moral, not material. In the Allied world, the same act was driven by science, by a belief that hygiene preserved health, efficiency, and morale. A Western soldier bathed not out of reverence, but out of reason. His shower was part of a system, one that linked plumbing, medicine, and civic order. It was an invisible architecture of civilization. When the Japanese prisoners witnessed hot water cascading from a single tap, they were not seeing luxury. They were seeing infrastructure. Hidden beneath that simple shower lay miles of pipework, pressure systems, and sanitation codes. It was the product of a society that had long fought disease with the same determination Japan had reserved for war. Letters and testimonies from the post-war years describe this quiet astonishment. Men who had lived through jungle fever and rationed canteens suddenly found themselves in clean uniforms, eating sterilized food, walking in camps where waste was managed, not ignored. The West had industrialized comfort. Japan had industrialized sacrifice. Both believed they served a higher cause. But in the aftermath, one produced machines that preserved life, while the other had built machines that ended it. The showers were not symbols of pity. They were evidence of a different kind of victory, the triumph of systems over suffering. The first time it happened, there was silence. A group of weary Japanese prisoners stood in line before a small concrete building inside an Allied internment camp in the Pacific. The guards spoke little. Gestures were enough. One by one, the prisoners stepped forward, clutching towels and pieces of soap they did not yet understand. Inside, the air was warm and faintly metallic. A pipe hissed. Then, from above, came something that felt like rain, but controlled, deliberate, endless. The men froze. Some stepped back in shock. Others extended their hands as if testing a miracle. For soldiers who had fought in caves, trenches, and jungles, bathing had been a task of discipline, often in cold water drawn by hand. Here, warmth fell freely from the ceiling. It carried no ritual, no hierarchy, only the quiet rhythm of pressure and release. The water coursed over scars, over exhaustion, over the salt of years spent at sea. Some prisoners stood motionless for minutes, unsure if they were permitted to enjoy it. Others began to scrub, cautious at first, then with growing conviction. The room filled with the steady sound of cleansing, a rhythm both mechanical and human. For the guards watching, it was a simple routine. For the prisoners, it was disorienting. The very nation that had defeated them was offering warmth, sanitation, and soap, not as reward, but as necessity. In that moment, a strange realization emerged. Civilization could express power, not through punishment, but through order. The showers, the meals, the medical care. They were not acts of mercy. They were demonstrations of how another world functioned. The war had been fought with weapons, but the peace was being revealed through plumbing. In the months that followed, routine replaced confusion. Each morning, prisoners lined up for inspections, for meals, for showers. What had once seemed foreign became ritual once more, but of a different kind. The camp became a quiet classroom, where discipline met sanitation, and order was maintained not by command, but by design. Reports from Allied camp officers noted something subtle. The prisoners adapted quickly. They began cleaning the barracks, organizing tools, maintaining the latrines to standards beyond expectation. Habits born from military obedience found new expression in cleanliness, precision, and structure. The Japanese spirit of order was not lost, it was redirected. Some prisoners later wrote of these moments with astonishment. They spoke of the first taste of sterilized water, of doctors who treated wounds without insult, of food served not to humiliate, but to sustain. To men who had been taught that surrender erased honor, such gestures defied comprehension. Yet beneath the surface, these experiences reshaped perception. When the war ended and the camps were dissolved, many returned to a Japan that would rebuild itself not through conquest, but through technology, plumbing, power, transport, manufacturing. The same efficiency that had once produced engines of war would now create engines of comfort. Historians would later call it transformation, but in truth, it began with smaller things, with soap, with clean floors, with the understanding that civilization's strength is measured not only in weapons, but in how it preserves life. The showers of the POW camps were more than hygiene. They were symbols of transition, from survival to sustainability, from obedience to understanding. And though the men who stepped beneath that warm water could not yet know it, they were witnessing the first gentle currents of Japan's rebirth. Civilization, in its quietest form, is often misunderstood. It does not always reveal itself through art or empire or invention. Sometimes it begins with water, clear, warm, and freely given. The Japanese prisoners who first encountered modern showers had lived through a century shaped by discipline and sacrifice. Their nation had risen from isolation to power through industrial will, but in the pursuit of victory, it had neglected the gentler virtues of peace. The camps, meant for containment, became unlikely classrooms in civility, hygiene, and humanity. Decades later, as Japan rebuilt, those same principles would define its rebirth. Factories that once built weapons turned to automobiles. Engineers who studied efficiency in destruction mastered it in design. Cleanliness, order, and precision became not tools of war, but symbols of a new identity. What those men witnessed in the showers was not simply modern plumbing. It was a mirror, reflecting what progress could mean when stripped of pride and violence. To cleanse the body, after all, is also to cleanse the past. In that moment of astonishment, steam rising, the smell of soap in the air, the line between conqueror and conquered blurred. Both sides, in their own way, were forced to confront the paradox of civilization, that true strength lies not in domination, but in the quiet, methodical care that sustains life. History often remembers battles and treaties, yet between them, moments like these whisper a different lesson, one about humility, adaptation, and the strange ways human progress travels. For those Japanese prisoners, the showers were an introduction to a new world. And for history, they marked the beginning of Japan's long journey from the ashes of war to the polished order of modern peace.